in a life of an ordinary person, when we have to confront a man-eating tiger, or a mad dog, or a criminal with a deadly weapon. Most of our occasions of the fearfulness in our life is at the other end of the spectrum. Just kind of a feelings of stress in this situation, this difficulty, this problem, some small threatening thing to our psychology or to our person, something that makes us feel uneasy, that makes us withdraw within ourselves. Everyone in the world feels fear. Everything is attended with fear. Children are afraid of the dark. Women are afraid of losing their beauty. Men are afraid of losing their career. Politicians are afraid of losing their high office. Celebrities afraid of losing their name and fame. Rich people afraid of losing their wealth. Everything in this world is attended by fear. Renunciation alone is fearless. Those lines, I'm quoting those lines from a famous verse in the writings of Bhartrahari called the Vairagya Shatakam. Everyone feels fear. And it's natural. It's part of being human. It's a natural, primal, one of the 8 primary emotions. And, sometimes the object of our fear is illusory. And just as if you were to see a snake in a rope, momentarily you're frightened, but then immediately you see, there's nothing to fear. Maybe at night you look and you see what appears to be a thief coming to rob your house. You look again, you see, oh no, it's just the stump of a tree. I just imagined it. It was an imaginary fear. But on the other hand, we live in the real world. And there are sources of veridical fear. Oftentimes we have good reasons to feel apprehension, anxiety, and that fear response. Therefore, how can we deal with that feeling? How can we work with that feeling as students of personal growth and spiritual life? And we have before us a very good maxim, which is our title this morning. And it comes from an incident that was related by Swami Vivekananda at the Parliament of Religions. In one of his lectures, he referred to this happening years before, while he was in the city of Benares in India. He'd gone maybe to visit a Durga temple, famous even today as the Monkey Temple. Now, Benares is a city which has one of the problems in the city is that there are thousands of monkeys running around and tormenting tourists. And these are not small, cute little monkeys. These are langur monkeys. That is, they're pretty big, and they have sharp teeth. And Swami Vivekananda had perhaps gone to this temple, made pranams to the Divine Mother Durga, bought maybe a little packet of muri, that is of puffed rice, and then had left. And no sooner did he leave there that he was found that he was being tracked by and pursued by a troop of these monkeys who came up close to him, pawing at his legs and screeching and howling. He quickened his pace, but he couldn't shake them off. And he was walking there between a wall and a tank, that is a big water pool. So there's nowhere to go except down this road. And he began to run down this road to escape the monkeys, but the monkeys were biting and clinging to his feet. And then he heard a voice. It was an old sadhu sitting by the side of the road who called out to him, "Turn and face the brutes." And Vivekananda, hearing this, he stopped. He turned, and he faced that troop of monkeys. And they were startled, and they fell back. And then they screeched and howled and scampered away. So from that, Swami Vivekananda learned a lesson. The lesson that he had learned there was that when you're pursued by difficulties, you have problems, you have things which threaten you and are causing you dangers in your life, the one best way to deal with that problem is to turn and to face it. And the only way that we can overcome nature, the goal of spiritual life, is to overcome nature, internal and external. The only way we can triumph over nature is to turn and to stand our ground and to fight if necessary and to confront the source of our danger so that we can be victorious. Now, let me tell you a few other. This morning is going to be kind of story time. So, let me tell you a few other events. One from the life of Swami, which illustrate our theme here. On another occasion, Swami Vivekananda, this was happened in 1895 on the outskirts of London. He had gone for a picnic with an Englishman and woman, and they'd crossed over a fence into a large pasture with a sloping hill, and they spread their blanket there, and they began to lay out the items for their picnic. And they turned and looked, and they saw there on that hill, at the top of that hill, there appeared a bull with the big horns, looking down at them, who had invaded his territory. Lumbering down that hill, the bull began to charge the picnickers. And the Englishman, frankly, turned and ran. And the English woman, she turned and she ran. But have you ever seen pictures of the women at the turn of the century? They used to wear these voluminous dresses. Very quickly she tripped and fell. And Swami Vivekananda, seeing that, he took up his stand, an heroic stance, in front of the woman, crossing his arms and staring down the bull. And later on, Sister Nivedita asked him a question. He says, well, what were you thinking at that time? He said, well, I was calculating that bull, that the weight, his weight, and what was my weight, and how fast was he coming, and what would be the force of when he hit me, how far would my body fly through the air, doing this mathematical calculation. But the bull came down, he charged up. Vivekananda did not move. The bull stopped right in front of him, looked at him quizzically, then threw his head in the air and turned and retreated sullenly. So, face your fear. He faced his fears and had a happy outcome. Well, if we think about the lives of the other disciples, direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, we find some further incidents. On one occasion, Swami Vedarupananda, he had the habit at one time of sitting on the banks of the river Ganges in the early hours of the morning and reciting the Nirvana Shatakam, which is a text of non-dualism, where you say that I am the divine immortal soul, I'm not the body, I have no arms, I have no legs, I have no mind, I am the pure spirit. Like that, he would recite the lines to those verses. One day, he'd finished his chanting, and he went to take his bath there in the river Ganges, waded into the water above his waist, above his shoulders, and there he is in the water. He looks over to one side, and there he sees, coming towards him, is a crocodile. Now, you may think of crocodiles, you think, well, wait a minute, crocodiles, alligators, they live in a swamp, don't they? They don't live in a river. But, matter of fact, they do live in rivers. And even alligators have been filmed, that is in Florida, been filmed swimming in the waters off the coast of Florida, so they can tolerate even salt, because the water in the Ganges, at the mouth of the Ganges, is a little saline. When the tide goes out, the tide comes in. In any case, crocodiles are comfortable even in that saline water. And so there were that crocodile swimming towards him. Immediately, Swami Vedarupananda, reaction response, primal reaction, struggling, scrambling to get out of the water. That was his first reaction. But then second reaction is he remembered, oh, wait a minute, I was sitting there reciting those high-minded thoughts of Vedanta. Now here, look at me. I'm being compelled by fear of and so his whole body relaxed. That is, his will, there's a shift in the will and his self-identity. And he said, no, I am that divine immortal soul. And he relaxed back into the water. The crocodile swam towards him, swam right by him. And people are not their usual food. And so on that occasion, Swami Vedarupananda took a bold step forward in affirming the truths of Vedanta. There's another Swami. He has a long name, Swami Trigunatitananda. And this was another disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. He, on one occasion, he as a very young boy, he went swimming in a tank, that is a pond, that nearby every village there's a big pond. Where's the water, which is used for a whole variety of reasons. But as a boy, he goes swimming in this pond. And what to his horror he found when he was there in that water, that he was overrun by a swarm of water spiders. And thousands of these water spiders came and they climbed all over his head. And as a little boy, he was so frightened, scrambled out of the water. And from then on, for a long time, he had the residual fear of spiders. Now, on one occasion, later on, Swami Vedarupananda, he came to San Francisco. He built our old temple in San Francisco. And on one occasion with the men, the devotees, they were cleaning out a closet. And the Swami saw in the closet, he saw a spider web with a spider in it. And he startled, he shocked, he stepped back out of the closet. And the other men who were working along with him, and they said, "What's the problem here, Swami? It's just a house spider." And at that point, Swami Vedarupananda, he realized, this is a troublesome residual fear. He said, "I've got to get rid of this." And so he thought, what can I do? What can I do? And then he thought, I've seen pictures of the spiders in his books or in these magazines. And so he got into the habit, as he would cut out these pictures. Whenever he saw a spider, he'd get the scissors, he'd cut out the picture of that spider, and then he strung them all together on a piece of thread. And from that thread he used to hang these lines of these spider images in the dining room of the old temple. And there he'd go there early, they'd go down in the morning for breakfast. What would he see? Spiders everywhere. And gradually, he became he'd kind of stumbled on what later came to be called desensitization therapy. Of course, he didn't know anything about that, but he anticipated that. And so in this way, he kind of dealt with his fear. And he faced his fear, and he overcame it. Now, Swami Trigunatita, like Swami Vivekananda, and like Swami Abhedananda, were, in particular among the disciples, they had inquiring minds. That is, they were often curious about the supernatural, about psychic phenomena, about paranormal events. They were open-minded, but they were skeptical. They wanted to find things out for themselves. And when they heard the claims of fakirs and magicians, and they heard the stories of a ghost or some haunted house, they'd feel a little curious to go and check it out for themselves to see if there was any truth in it, or if these were just local superstitions. And, they had a whole variety of experiences to answer that question. Swami Trigunatita had one experience where he had living in the Alam Bazar Mat, he had often heard stories about ghosts. You see our theme this morning. This is Halloween season. This is about confronting our fears. He often had heard stories that he always wanted to see a ghost, but he was never successful. And then, on one occasion, he had heard tell of a claim that, yes, there is a ghost that appears in a certain room at a certain time in his house. And hearing that story, he resolved to find out for himself. And so late one night, he went to that abandoned building, found out that room, got there 2 hours early, settled himself there, seated in meditation, waiting. And the time came, midnight passed, and he was about to give up hope when there appeared in the far corner of that room, there appeared a light. And in the middle of the light was an eye. And the eye had a very evil, malevolent stare. Fixed on the Swami, the eye in the light began to approach him closer and closer. Swami's looking there. He feels as if his senses were leaving his body. He feels as if he's a little green tree that's being the onslaught of a raging forest fire. He's feeling all of his powers are being withered up. He's frozen with fear as this eye appears, and just as he was about to lose consciousness, he had a vision of his master, Sri Ramakrishna. And Sri Ramakrishna appeared before him, held out his hand, lifted him up, and he said, "My child," he said, "all well." As soon as that appeared, that light disappeared, the eye disappeared. He felt his senses returning, and he heard the voice of Sri Ramakrishna saying, "My child, why are you so foolish, so as to tempt certain death? It is enough for you to think of me alone." And so it was the lesson that Swami Trigunatita learned, that yes, he had a healthy curiosity, but why be foolish? And in fact, that's a good lesson. That is, we can ask ourselves, we ought not to be foolish so as to face certain death. But on the other hand, in this world of Maya, where there's good and there's evil, and on occasion we have to face up to what may be a veridical fear and source of evil. Let me tell you a Celtic, this is the time, the Druids, priests who used to worship under, they call them Druids, because they used to worship under the Drew, that is the oak trees. I'll tell you about a young lady who faced the forces of evil. Lady Mary was young, and Lady Mary was fair. And she had 2 brothers, and she had more lovers than she could count. But among them all, her favorite was Mr. Fox. And Mr. Fox was charming, and he was brave. And she liked him best of all. And as time passed, they were engaged to be married. And she asked Mr. Fox, "Where shall we live?" And he said, "Oh, well, we'll live in my castle." And he described his castle, and he described where it was. But strangely enough, he never invited her to visit. Never invited her brothers to visit. And so one day, just before the signing of the marriage contract, while the brothers were away on business and Mr. Fox were away on business, Lady Mary decided to go and look at that castle. She had the directions. She left home alone. She ought to go over hill and dale through the forest, and sure enough, she came to a great castle. And there was a wall around, a drawbridge over a moat. And she came up to the gate, and she was feeling some apprehension, being there all alone. But she looked up, and over the gate, there was an inscription. "Be bold, be bold." And reading that, she took some heart, and she crossed over the drawbridge, and she came to the great oaken door of the castle. And again, she felt some apprehension as she looked up, and she saw another inscription that said, be bold, but not too bold." And she knocked on the door. There's no one home. She pushed on the door, it creaked open. She came into the entrance hall. There she saw tables, chairs, big casks of wine over by the wall. She walked in, no one there. Great staircase. She walked up the staircase. It was a long hallway. She walked down the long hallway, looking from the right to the left of the rooms. Doors were open. Furnished room, so no one in there. She got down to the end of the hallway, and there was a door that was closed. And she was curious. But she looked up, and she saw over that door there was another inscription that said, be bold, but not too bold, lest your heart's blood run cold. Well, she was curious. So she opened that door, and she looked in, and oh, what was her horror to see that there in that bloody chamber, there hung all the bodies of young ladies like herself, all cut up and their bodies hanging there in a terrible fashion. She cried out. She slammed the door to the bloody chamber. She ran back down the hall and was starting down the steps when there she saw through the window Mr. Fox is returning, dragging the dead body of another young lady behind him, dragging her by her hair. What could she do? She was kind of trapped. And so she ran down those stairs, and she hid behind a big cask of wine. Just as Mr. Fox opened that door, dragged the body in, and was going up started up the stairs. And then he stopped, and he looked at the hand. On the hand of this woman, there was a golden ring. And he looked at that ring, and he tried to take that ring off her finger, but it wouldn't come off his finger, and it angered him. And so he pulled out his sword, and he was so angry, he just chopped off the hand. And the hand went force of that blow, the hand just went flying up in the air, and it flew over and over the air, and it landed in Lady Mary's lap, behind the wine cask. And Mr. Fox, he looked around, he didn't see anything. They dragged that body up the stairs, down the hall, and into the bloody chamber. Well, Lady Mary, shocked, she jumped up. She had her opportunity. She ran out the door, across the drawbridge, out of the gate, through the forest, got back home safely. Well, it so happened the very next day was a breakfast feast for celebrating the marriage contract. The brothers had returned home. Father was there. Everything was laid out. And Mr. Fox had been invited. And as he arrived, and they all sat down at the breakfast table, and he was in good humor. He smiled, said, well, yes, yeah, my dear, how are you? She said, well, I'm not very good. She said, yesterday I had a very shocking experience. And Mr. Fox said, oh, is that so? He said, well, why don't you tell us about it? Hear the words of your sweet voice. It'll help to pass the time. And so she began her story of what she had seen and how she had gone through the forest and had come to that one gate and another inscription, and had seen that bloody chamber and had narrowly escaped there and had seen him cut that hand. And as she was telling her story, Mr. Fox was more sitting there. He was stunned. He was shocked. He was angered. He was flustered. He was confused. And when she had finished, he stood up. And he said, but it is not so. It was not so. And God forbid that it could ever be so. You're also imagining all this. And then Lady Mary, she sat there and she said, oh, but Mr. Fox, it is so. And it was so. And hand and ring I have to show. She put the hand on the table. And the father looked at the hand. The brothers looked at that hand. And then they drew their mighty broadswords. And they cut Mr. Fox into 100 pieces. So that's the old Druidic folktale. Facing your fears. Well, justice was done. And she kind of followed the maxim this morning. If you read the Vedarupananda, you read the famous words, or in the beginning of the Mundaka Upanishad, the first line, in the beginning, Brahma Devanam Pratama Sambhabhuva Vishwasya Karta Bhuvanasya Gopta. These are the first lines from the Mundaka Upanishad, describing the feelings of Brahma, the creator of this world, in the Vedarupananda Upanishad, when he first appeared. His first feeling as he looked around him everywhere in the universe, he realized that he was alone. And his first feeling, he felt fear. He was afraid. But then he thought to himself, wait a minute. What is there to fear? I alone exist. Fear only comes from the thought of a second. If there is one only without a second, then there can be no fear. Thinking thus, Brahma became fearless. And as to that, we can think about the story of a king This is the last story. This is about a king who was afraid of his shadow. Well, he was a good king. He ruled wisely and well. He was beloved of all of the people in his kingdom. But he had a big problem, personal problem. He was afraid of his shadow. And he really couldn't concentrate on his kingly duties because he was always apprehensive. Look down there and there would be that shadow. What can I do? He didn't know how to get away from it. He tried to step out of it, but it seemed to be, it followed right along with him. And he asked the advice of the ministers. He said, what can I do? One minister said, well, cut off its head. Well, they tried there. It didn't work at all. How about just boiling it in oil? And they tried to pour some boiling oil, but he said, well, that didn't work. He said, wait a minute, this is attached to my feet. Don't do any more of the oil. And they said, well, why don't we nail it to the ground? They tried that, but the nails wouldn't hold. Another minister suggested, well, why don't we paint it out? No, tried that. Still, it pursued him wherever he goed. That source of apprehension. And finally, he could bear it no longer. And he thought, I can't. He decided to kind of confine himself to a great ivory tower. During the day, he would rule from the tower, where he had no sun wasn't shining, couldn't see his shadow. And so like this, time passed. He would never appear out during the day. Now it so happened that in that kingdom was invaded by a fearsome dragon. And that dragon, it was not an ordinary dragon. It was as big as a house. And when the dragon turned, his tail would knock over buildings. And when he breathed fire and smoke. And that fire consumed haystacks. And he terrorized the villagers. And so the word went out, how can we do? What can we do? Call upon the king. He is our protector. And the word got back to the king. It's a big problem in the kingdom. Now the king he's the protector of the people. And he had to do his dharma. And so, in spite of his fear, he resolved to go and confront that dragon. So he came down out of his tower. It came down into the daylight, cold for his horse, and all the accoutrements. He mounted that horse. But he was careful on that day to set off a little later in the day when the sun was setting behind him so that his shadow would fall in front of him so he could keep an eye on his shadow. And so in this way, he rode off to confront the dragon. Now the dragon, turning this way, knocking over houses, breathing fire. He heard that king was coming. And he looked over at the hill, waiting for the king to come. Then he saw over the hill, there he saw the shadow. And the dragon breathed fire. Yes, let him come. But as he looked at the shadow, that shadow kept coming and coming and coming more. It was longer and longer and longer. And the dragon, seeing that, was thinking, this must be a very mighty warrior to cast such a long shadow. And seeing this, the dragon became frightened. And he breathed fire, flapped his wings, and he flew off away, never to return again to that kingdom. There's the king. The king arrives there at the crest of the hill. He sees the dragon turn and fly away. Great relief. Great feeling of, yes, you've done my dharma. Yes, I am victorious. He's had victory over that dragon. And filled with that sense of self, he turned his horse around. Happy now, he'd dealt with his problem. Returning home, he rode back into the kingdom. Villagers, seeing his victory, returning in victory, greeted him from the right and from the left. And thus he returned to his palace. He never, ever once thought about his shadow. All that way back, he completely forgot about his shadow. Because after all, what has a king? A king who has defeated a mighty dragon. What need has he to be afraid of his own shadow? So the king, there's the king. The king before is like us. And the king, the shadow, of course, in the iconography of mysticism and is always at least in Christian mysticism, is always the ego. The ego is the source, yoga psychology, vidyasmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. These are the 5 kleshas. What's the source of all of our fear? It is avidya, ignorance, the source of egoism. And egoism is the source of we have 2 fundamental emotions. That is, in all Western psychology, they boil it down to maybe 8 primary emotions, 8 secondary, tertiary. In Indian psychology, is only 2 basic emotions. Positive and negative, raga and dvesha, attraction and aversion. What is the source? The source is our own sense of limitation, our own sense, we could say our sense of being a separate self. Once we can remove that sense of separate self, then we have a shift of identity. The fearful king becomes the triumphant king. And no longer forgets about his shadow fears that have really no substantial existence even compared to the truth of our own true self. And therefore the goal and purpose of this Vedanta philosophy is to realize our true self. It's called the Atman, Brahman. Brahman alone is fearless. And he who knows it becomes the fearless Brahman. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
We have questions and any comments?
Oh, let's see if we have... I didn't think we were going to have any time, but okay. We have 1 or 2 questions if you have a...
So it was very... Your talk was very Jungian to me, because it brought up how he speaks of the shadows, and he speaks of opening those doors, which you're most afraid of. So I want to thank you for incredible storytelling, and it was very powerful. Thank you.
As you know, in Vedanta, you may say, well, This is that you may say, well, this all sounds like psychology. See, this doesn't say where's all the soul, God, and religion. But as you know, in the Vedanta philosophy, the wisdom of the East, Western thinking, we have at the university, we have the psychology department is here, philosophy department's over here, religion is maybe over here. Everything is compartmentalized. Whereas in this Vedanta philosophy, it's all these are all integral parts. Certainly yoga psychology, an integral part of our sense of self and importance in personal development. Om Dyo Shantihi Antariksham Shantihi Prithivi Shantihi Apa Shantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishwe Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Saravam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Same Shantiredhi Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Om, peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.